To begin my thoughts this morning, I share a few quotes that I have come across over the years. And the first quote was actually a book written by Thomas Wolfe. And it was entitled, "You Can't Ever Go Home Again." Think about that for a moment. You can't ever go home again, and I believe that there is a fair amount of truth to this statement because times change. Seasons change. And while memories linger, our present reality is always in flux. It's always evolving and it's changing. But as believers, in the midst of this, in the midst of all of the change, we keep our sights on what is to come. The promise of where our true home someday will be. As believers, we walk day by day toward the promise of resurrection and the eternal home we have with God. Along those lines, I have heard another quote that people have shared with me about other people. And it goes something like this. That person is so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. They're so heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. Now there may be a hint of truth in that wisdom, but we as believers must affirm that we are no earthly good if we are not heavenly minded. We are led by our future glory as we sustain ourselves through our present work, labor, challenges, and changes. The very essence of our faith since the day of creation is that earth is a way station to a new creation. Please hear that. Earth is merely a way station to somewhere else. And Paul's second letter to the church of Corinth emphasizes the synergy between where we are today and the assurance in the future. I'd like to take a moment to dive in to see what Paul has to say about this reality of death and the promise of resurrection. And it begins in the first 5 verses of the 5th chapter. And it says this, "For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, because when we are clothed, we will not be found naked. For while we are in this tent, we groan and are burdened because we do not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, so that this is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guarantee. Let that word sink in. Guarantee what is to come. Last week we were in the 4th chapter of 2 Corinthians. And Paul described our bodies as jars of clay. We moved to the 5th chapter and Paul describes our bodies as a tent. Now think about that. Tents are really great for camping. They just don't offer the greatest protection during a severe storm when things get hairy. Our tents, our bodies, are amazing creations, but they only last a short time. They break down, they falter, they will fail, they are mortal. But we are promised a resurrection body, a building of strength in God's complete glory. And I think as Christians, we often overlook the promise that's before us this morning. The promise that the present Spirit within us is only a deposit. It's a guarantee, a down payment, if you will, for a new body, a resurrected body, moving from a mortal tent toward an immortal building. Paul challenges the popular belief of a mere spiritual resurrection after death and moves us toward the fulfillment of a new bodily life after death, encouraging us to have faith in what we cannot presently see. But he doesn't stop there. He encourages us to have faith in what we cannot see, but secondly, to be confident in that. To be confident in the future. He continues in verses 6 through 8. Therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we live by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. We live in a present culture that has no understanding of that. We live in a culture that teaches us that this is as good as it gets. We live in a society that teaches us to live like there's no tomorrow. We live in a society that teaches us that heaven should be on earth. But Paul reminds us that we are merely exiles here. We're sojourners. We're headed somewhere else. We are strangers in this earthly life. In other words, we're not home yet, friends. It might feel like it, but we're not home yet. And this understanding can bring about deep discouragement and disappointment to so many believers where the future should be now. And heaven should be on earth. But that's not how it works. And if you think it is, my friends, understand it is so feeble. And many times we simply give up and create a self-imposed hell on earth if we think this is heaven. The question I pose to you today is this to wrestle with. Are we more confident in our earthly life or in the life that is to come? In discerning this question, we must look at how we live. And are we more attuned in what we see in the here or now, or more confident in that which we cannot see yet? Do we live merely by sight or by faith? Which is the evidence and the assurance of those things not seen? I believe it is a tragic irony to have more confidence in our mortal bodies, in our bank accounts, in our government, and even in our churches and pastors than we do in God's guarantee. Did you catch that word? Guarantee of what is to come. Paul teaches us to look at those things we cannot see and have confidence in those things we cannot see. But in the meantime, we have a role to play. And that role is to please God. Verses 9 and 10. So we make it our goal to please Him, whether we are at home in the body or away from it. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due for us, the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. This illustrates, my dear friends, the reason we live. The purpose of our life is to please God. Our DNA longs for a connection beyond ourselves, and why I believe simply teaching our children to be themselves or to be happy will always leave them disappointed, bored, and unfulfilled. Paul is urging us to make the main thing the main thing. That in this life, living in this tent that oftentimes groans and feels burdened, our purpose is to please God, not by jumping through hoops or checking off commandment boxes, but by living in love. We please God by living in love. And this love, or lack of love, will be our witness before the judgment seat of Christ. Now, let me get a little Baptist on you here. I could spend 4 weeks on that one verse about the judgment seat of Christ. Let's understand something. That as a believer, someone who has accepted Jesus Christ into their lives, as believers, the judgment seat of God will be very different than those who do not believe. The judgment seat of God, if you are a believer, has very little or nothing to do with salvation. As a believer, as a person who has received Jesus into your hearts, you understand that the cross did it all. That Jesus suffered and died on the cross, shed His blood for your sins and for your salvation. Done. Even Paul writes in the 8th chapter of Romans that there is no condemnation with those that are with Jesus Christ. So as we stand before Christ in this judgment seat, that's not about salvation, because if it is, and the cross didn't do it, I can't think of anything more heretical. The cross, if it says anything, it says, I will give you the gift of my body, my blood. I will give you the gift of your sins forgiven and offer you the amazing grace of salvation, period. If it says anything less than that, the cross is a hoax. So as we stand before Christ at the judgment seat, it's not about if you are a believer, whether you're saved or not. It is all about the response to that gift. If you've received the gift, we then are held accountable to that gift, my friends. We will stand before Jesus Christ at the judgment seat, and in that moment, we will be accountable for our works, our fruit, our giftedness, and the harvest, and that will be on full display. Jesus will reveal to us all the gifts that have been given to us, and then we will be held accountable for what we did with them. You see, judgment in this case is about rewarding or rebuking. We will either sit ashamed before Jesus Christ, or we will stand faithfully before our Lord as a faithful disciple of the one who saved us in the first place. That's why I love Wesleyan theology. It has both. We've been given an awesome gift, that the cross is the exclamation point of our salvation, but it doesn't stop there. What have you done with it? Have you shown justice? Have you shown mercy? Have you walked humbly with God? And the judgment seat of Christ will reveal it all. I am this. The good news this morning, my friends, and I say it in every celebration of life service I've ever done. The good news is that death is not death at all. It is an entrance into a new life. It's an invitation to a new life. I came across this in my study this week. It's awesome. It's my new mantra. Death is moving day. That's all. Death is moving day. Moving away from our mortal tents and moving into an eternal building. A dwelling in heaven fulfilling God's very